Good afternoon, everyone. All right, welcome to our session for Financial Accounting 3. This is WIL Financial Accounting 3, sorry. In today's session, I will be going through the WIL task that I believe most of you have already started completing. So in this session, I'm not just giving you answers. No. This is a session whereby I'm guiding you on what is expected as you finalize your WIL task, because I believe right now you should be finalizing everything. You should have at least started drafting or almost done. So this session comes before you submit your first draft, just to give you additional guidance as to what is expected. So I'll just go through the different questions that are set, different tasks, then explain to you what is expected. As I go through, if you've got any questions, specific questions that you want to ask relating to this task, please ask, and then I will assist you. Okay. Let's go to the questions. Okay, this is the WIL task. I will pause you for a minute. Please go through the information, then I'll start explaining as we go on. Now, if you look at the first statement, it says you must select at least one South African company that publishes its financial statements. Just this point is actually guiding you on which companies you are to select. At this level, this is the level, I believe you all know that we have got private companies. We also have got public companies. It is very difficult, if not impossible, for you to be able to just get a financial statement of a private company. Just think of any company that you know, even the company that you're working for. If it's a private company, most of you might never have seen any published financial statements of that particular company. So imagine any other private company that you don't work for, because they are not published publicly. In other words, a private company is allowed just to keep its information to the management, to the directors, or any relevant person. It is not a must for private companies to publish their financial statements. All right, so it is not a must for private companies to publish their financial statements. But if you look at public companies, it is a legal requirement for all public companies to publish their financial statements. If you can just immediately go online, just say companies registered on the JSE, you will see a number of companies coming up. If you say financial statements of public companies listed on the JSE, you will see a number of companies just coming up. So just at this point that I'm explaining, the emphasis that you are expected to use financial statements of public companies. There's no struggle trying to get financial statements from the companies that you work for. Most probably they are not going to give it to you because it is a private company. But just go online, you look for public companies, and actually you need also to be specific. For example, if you want financial statements of public companies in the mining industry, you specify that. In retail sector, you specify that. So just specify a number of public companies will come up. Then you select one that you think will suit your purposes, and then you use that one. I will advise that use the ones that are not too detailed. Use the ones that are a bit simpler for you. Otherwise, if you use some of these published financial statements are a bit complicated, because you guys, you don't really cover all the concepts that are published in those financial statements. So it can be confusing to you. So I'll suggest that choose financial statements from a company that seems a bit simple. In other words, some financial statements will be 200 pages. I wouldn't advise you to go there. I wouldn't even advise you to go to 100 pages. I would advise that you look for 40 pages, 50, then you can find public financial statements which are around 40, 50 pages. Use those. They don't really have a lot of detail that might end up confusing you. So that is the first point. If you look at the second point, saying your answers must. This is not a task, but it's additional guidance that is given to you. Apply relevant IFRS standards covered in the study guides. I'm sure you know what are international financial reporting standards. The ones that are included in your study guides are the ones that you will use in your answers. Include references. This is something that have been mentioned several times, that students are expected to reference their sources. So whatever source you use, please provide a reference, because when you are referencing, you're actually acknowledging the author of that particular information that you're using. So if you don't reference, in other words, you are claiming that whatever you wrote came from you, which is incorrect, because whatever you wrote, you had to take it from somewhere. By taking from somewhere, I don't mean cutting and pasting. Cutting and pasting is plagiarism. So I'm touching basically on points that you come across as you mark your WIL task, and some of these points are the reasons why you're not really performing well in this task. I haven't really gone to the task itself. I'm still going to go there. Right. I was saying, when you do research, cutting and pasting work of another, that is not research. It's called plagiarism and it's not allowed. So if a marker determines that you actually plagiarized, you are going to get 0 for that task, because it is not allowed. If you go through this WIL document, you will see that in certain sections, it is emphasized that students are not allowed to plagiarize. So you will get 0 for that. Okay, back to research. If you're researching, it means that you go through work that was published by other people, you read through. If there's certain information or certain statements or certain conclusions that they are making that you think are relevant to you, what do? You borrow those statements, you write them using your own words. Then at the end, you indicate where you got that information from. That is academic writing. So you're expected to be able to write in an academic standard or in an academic way to avoid plagiarism. So you get, or you research, you look for the information that is relevant, and then you write it using your own words. You put the source of the information. Where did you get that information from? Then the next point is that your task or your final submission should be structured and clearly presented. I will advise that structure your tasks based on the questions. Like, for example, we've got question 1. We're still going to look at question 1. Indicate that this is question 1. Some students, sometimes they just take question 1 in full. I would advise that you do that. Take question 1, write question 1, and then take it in full as it is. Then underneath, you put your answer. Then when you move to question 2, you do the same thing. Take question 2 as it is, just cut and paste question 2. This is the only time that you're allowed to cut and paste. If you're cutting and pasting the questions that have been provided in the WIL task. So you can just cut and paste the question itself, and then underneath you present your answer. It will give structure to your answer, and it will be easy for the person who's marking your paper to actually see what's going on and to be able to follow which question exactly are you answering. It is quite challenging sometimes when we mark that students just mix up everything. If your tasks mix up and we're not able to tell whether this is question 1, whether this is the answer to question 1, question 5, question 3, at the end of the day, we are not going to allocate any marks to you, because marks are based on your answers relevant to specific questions. So it has to be an answer which relates to a specific question. So if I'm marking and I can't tell whether this answer is question 1 or question 5, there is no way that I can allocate marks, because I don't have a basis for allocating marks to the particular answers that have been presented by the student. So I will advise that if you're answering question 1, please just take question 1 as it is, indicate that it's question 1. Don't just write question 1 as indicated on the screen there. I'm sure you can see. Take it as it is, you paste it, then you can even skip a line to show that, okay, this was the question, now I'm moving to my answer. Then after skipping a line, you start presenting your answers and ensure that the answer that you're providing relates to the particular question. Then the next thing is saying demonstrate understanding, analysis, synthesis, not just production of content. I think I've already stated that you read different sources, you identify what relates to your whatever you're writing, you paraphrase, write using your own words, and then you indicate the source. Do the same for other sources. So at the end of the day, you are actually demonstrating that you're understanding what you're doing. You're analyzing the information that you're reading and then using it to answer the question. Then the next point is saying use calculations, tables, and examples where appropriate. This is accounting, although it's a will task. Sometimes you might be expected to do to perform certain calculations. So yes, please show your calculations wherever you have to do them. Then the last part is saying your assessment or your answers must be typed and submitted as a professional report. Okay. This is a bit tricky because sometimes we do get students that tell us that they are struggling. They don't have printers, they don't have laptops. So you are allowed to write your answers using just a paper and a pen, although it is advisable that you type. The reason why we advise you to type is because sometimes you find that the handwritings are not even clear. Now, if I'm not able to read what you're writing, then at the end of the day, I cannot allocate marks. We allocate marks based on the points that you have raised. So if I can't read what you wrote, then how do I allocate marks? That's the reason why you will see that most of our tasks, we advise students to type. Typing also present your information in a professional manner than just writing. All right, that said, I was looking at the guidance. I will now be moving on to the task itself. I'll start with task 1. Let me check. There's task 1 and task 2. Task 2 is 30 marks. Then task 1 is also 30 marks. Let me first start with task 1. All right, please go through the information and then I will explain in 1 minute. All right, so let's look at task 1. It says, as a financial analyst, you are tasked with reviewing how effectively your selected company. I've already mentioned how you will select your company. Applies the conceptual framework principles in preparing its financial statements. This is topic 1 in your prescribed text. Please go through topic 1, which is the conceptual framework. Just go through it, ensure that you understand. Then the first question, it says, explain the purpose of the conceptual framework and the objective of general purpose financial reporting. Now, this is something that you can also research online. If you go online, you look at the purpose of the conceptual framework, you are going to find a lot of points that you can use. You also look for objectives of general purpose financial reporting. You are going to get a lot of information. Now, it's important that you look at the mark that have been allocated to the question. If you look at question 1, this is 5 marks. Please, if it's 5 marks, don't write 5 pages. We don't allocate 1 mark per page. It shows that you actually did not understand what you're doing. You're just cutting and pasting from other sources. So if a question is 5 marks, just stick with 5 points. Each point that you write will be allocated 1 mark. Most of the times, a point can just be 1 line or 2 lines. So for a 5 marks question, I expect to see, or we expect to see, just 5 lines or 5 bullet points that you explain briefly, because each point that you explain will be allocated 1 mark. So for question 1, for the purpose, please do not write in paragraphs. Most of the times, if you write in paragraphs, you end up repeating certain information. You also end up explaining 1 point over and over, and it doesn't help if you explain 1 point over and over, because we allocate marks based on the number of points that were raised. We don't allocate marks based on repeated information. So if you repeat one information, even though you write 5 pages, you are still going to get 1 mark, because you are just explaining at the same point. So that's question 1. This is information that you can easily find online. Please don't just go and cut and paste it. We will see that this information was cut and pasted online. So just read, understand, paraphrase. You write using your own words. That's paraphrasing. And then you'll get your 5 marks. Ensure that you raise 5 points that explain. You should have points that look at the purpose of the considered framework. Also have points that look at the objectives of general purpose financial reporting. In other words, this question is structured into 2 parts. If you only look at the purpose of the considered framework and ignore the other part, you are going to lose marks, no matter how much points you raise on the considered framework. So what I'm saying is that if a question is structured into 2 parts, please ensure that you take both parts into account as you write your answer, because obviously part of the marks are allocated to the first part, and then part of the marks are allocated to the second part of the question. That was question 1. We are now moving on to question 2. Question 2 is saying, identify and evaluate how the company that you have selected, okay, applies the fundamental and enhancing qualitative characteristics, e.g. relevance, faithful presentation, comparability, verifiability, timeliness, and assembly. Use examples from the financial statements that you've selected. Now, for you to be able to answer question 2, you need to know the qualitative characteristics. In other words, if we speak of relevance, do you know in relation to financial statements, do you know what that means? That's the starting point. So if you don't know what we mean by relevant financial statements, start by researching the meaning of relevance. Research faithful presentation. What do we mean if we say financial statements should be faithful presented? Comparability, what do we mean by that? Verifiability, what do we mean by that? As I said, I'm not here to tell you the answer, so I'm not going to define to you what is comparability. I'm not going to define to you what is verifiability, because this is not a lecture per se. It is a guidance as you structure, as you finalize your answers. So I'm not going to define anything, but I will lead you into how you can present your answers and how you can find information. So from these qualitative, you can even just select 5. You don't have to list all of them. We know you know all of them, but you don't have to list everything. Just select 5. Let's say relevance, that's 1. Faithful presentation, that's the second one. Comparability, that one. Verifiability, that's the 4th. And then you can end with timeliness. I'm not saying only focus on these. I'm saying select 5. And you explain based on the 5 that you have selected. To also look at the mark allocation. If I'm saying select 5, I'm also looking at the mark allocation, because the mark allocation is 15 marks. So if it's 15 marks and you've explained 5, what it means that each qualitative factor that you explain will be allocated 3 marks. Okay. Identifying will be 1 mark. So if you manage to identify 5, it means that you'll get 5 marks for identifying. Now we are left with 10 marks. So each explanation of each factor will be allocated 2 marks, 2 marks, 2 marks. Then you can easily score 15 marks. Everything that you explain should be based on the financial statements that you have presented. I'm sure you remember when I started this presentation, I explained that you are expected to get financial statements from public companies. These are available online. And when you submit, you are also going to submit the financial statements that you used. So the marker will check that the information that you are presenting is in line with the financial statements that you submitted. So if you're explaining anything that you explain, as long as the question requires you to link to the financial statement, ensure that the information that you use is linked. Okay. Right, back to question 2. But I think this is straightforward. I said, okay, the first part, you identify relevance. Identifying relevance, you will score 1 mark. Then you define what we mean by relevance. Define what we mean by relevance. You can find this in your textbook. You can find it in your stat guides. You can also find it online, these definitions of all these. So each factor that you have identified, please define it. Identifying, 1 mark. Defining, that's a 2nd mark. So you're now left with 1 more mark for you to score 15 marks. So what you're going to do, you now explain how the financial statements that you have submitted have been faithfully represented, or comparability. Let me just explain comparability just to give you an example, because it's a term that I believe everyone understands. Comparability deals with you being able to what? To compare. Comparability deals what? With being able to compare something. Now, if we look at financial statements, let's say you submitted financial statements for the year 2025. In your submission, you'll see that most companies, they actually give you previous year financial statements. So if you have submitted 2025, you will see that it is combined with the 2024. So you'll be having 2025 and 2024 financial statements. Right. Why do we have 2 financial statements? This allows you to be able to what? To compare, to check how the company has been performing previously and then how it is performing currently. This is comparability. You're comparing. The other thing, comparability, it only doesn't have to deal with the company itself. You compare the financial statements with companies in the same industry. In other words, let's say I've selected I think I'm giving you a lot of information. I'm not supposed to do this, but let me just go further and say, let's say you have selected a company in the mining industry. So if we look at comparability, it means that the financial statements that you have for that particular company, if you compare it to other companies in the mining industry, you will be able to actually what? Compare and be able to come up with valid conclusions based on the what? On the comparison that you're making. That is comparability. So explaining comparability further will also give you 1 mark. So in other words, 3 marks per factor that we've explained. I said you identify the factor, it's 1 mark. You define, 2nd mark. You explain linking the factor to the information that is presented in your financial statements. That's the final mark. So out of the 5 factors, if you identify, explain, link, you then score 15 marks. Okay, let me move to question 3. I think I'm moving very slow. Let me try to move quick so that we can cover this within the next 30 minutes. Using specific examples from the financial statements, explain how the company recognizes and measures 2 key elements: an asset, a liability. All right, it's a 10-mark question. Again, it's important for you to check the mark that have been allocated to the question. Otherwise, at the end of the day, if you don't check, you might lose some marks, because whatever you presented might not be detailed enough, might not be worth 10 marks. The other reason why you should check mark allocation, to avoid writing irrelevant information. Some of you, it's a 10-mark question and then you list 5-10 pages. That's irrelevant. It's 10 marks. Half a page should do. So the question specifies that you look at 2 items, which is an asset and a liability. So an asset will be allocated 5 marks. A liability will be allocated 5 marks. So whatever you do, please take that into account. The first part will be allocated 5 marks. That's an asset. Then the second part will also be allocated 5 marks. So using specific examples from the financial statements, I'm sure you can see that the examples that you use should come from your financial statements. I know most of you will be using the internet. You will be tempted to use examples that you see from the different websites. That's not going to work, because you're supposed to submit proof of your financial statements. So whatever information you're explaining, we're going to compare it to what is presented in your financial statements. Explain how the company recognizes measures to financial statement. Right. So firstly, I said you divide your answer into 2. You look at assets, you look at liabilities. Then I will start with the first part. Let's say you are looking at asset. Firstly, You explain how assets are recognized. Recognition or and measurement of assets is of assets. Let's say you are looking at property, plant, and equipment. That's PPE. It is based on accounting standards. So you will have now to refer to what? To International Accounting Standard 16. It is in your textbook. It is your prescribed material. You do it. You look at how your companies are supposed to recognize non-current assets. Then you explain how non-current assets are recognized. You get a mark for that. You also explain how non-current assets are also measured. You get a mark for that. And then after that, you get examples from your financial statements. Let's say there is land. You take land, you give us an example, you tell us the amount. Then based on the measurement, you now explain, based on the measurement definition, you now explain how the amount that have been presented was measured based on the definition that you presented. You go further and look at recognition definition. You take an example from the financial statement that you presented. You explain to us how that amount or how that asset was recognized based on the what? On the definition. So you are basically linking the definition to the financial statement that you presented. You do the same for the liabilities. I'm not going to go to the liabilities because I can see that time is moving. I will now move on to question 2 or to task 2. Please, should you have any questions as I go through the presentation, just ask. I will pause and attend to your questions. Now to task 2. Just go through the information and then we'll discuss. Right, so task 2, it looks at inventory and revenue recognition. It's also 30 marks. Let's go through the information together. You are a junior accountant reviewing inventory management and revenue recognition at your selected company. Again, it's important that you select public listed companies because you are not going to get information from private companies, as I've already explained. Then you've been asked to prepare a brief report evaluating compliance with IFRS. Let me just say that the financial statements that you used in question 1, you can still use it for task 2. So in task 1, you can still use it for task 2 because these are basically different concepts altogether. So you can apply it. It's up to you. Or if you want, you can find a different set of financial statements and then use it for task 2. Right, 2.1, identify the inventory valuation method used. This you can identify it from if you go to the notes to the financial statements. I believe even if you go through, let's just start with the information from your prescribed material. If you go to through your study guides, you will see that there are examples of financial statements that have been provided there. If you go even through your textbook, there are examples of financial statements that have been presented. Each and every item, or I'm now focusing on assets because an inventory is an asset. Let's start with assets. If you look at notes to the financial statements, you will see that each and every material item is actually explained in the form of a what? Of a note. For example, in most businesses, trading stock is regarded as a valuable item and is presented separately. So most of the times you will see that there is a line item for inventory, there is a line item for revenue. So both these, there will be notes underneath the financial statements that explain revenue, that explain inventory. So how do we identify the inventory valuation method? As you go through the notes for inventory and revenue, in those notes, the valuation method that was used will be presented. You'll be told that this company uses first in, first out, it uses the weighted average method. Okay. So you just take the information that is presented, not as it is. Please do not just go and cut and paste the whole page. Please take the relevant information, explain using your own words. Okay. Some points, if it's a short point, you can take it as it is, but longer points, paraphrase, write it in your own words and explain it. You do the same for revenue. If you go to the notes, you will find that there is, because it is a requirement that all companies should disclose the valuation method that was used. That's one. So it's 5 marks for that. I think these are simple marks. If you look at these questions, especially task 2, especially checking whether you are able to analyze or to just look at the financial statements and understand, because you are required to take the information from the financial statement and present it as your answer. So you need to know where you get that information from. You need to be able to understand the information and then paraphrase it and write it in your own words. Then 2, it's saying examine the company's cost components of inventories and calculate or extract the net realizable value of any inventory disclosed. Most of the times you are not going to be able to calculate using the information presented in the financial statements, because information presented in financial statements is not really a question. These are published financial statements that are telling you that the net realizable value of inventory is this amount. So you just go to the notes, you look for the explanation which deals with the cost price of inventories, which deals with net realizable value. You take it as it is and you apply it. Please just take note that this task 2 is divided into 2. You explain revenue, you explain inventories. But now, as I go through the required, I'm focusing on inventory. You will then use the same information to apply it to revenue recognition. I'm not going to have enough time to touch on both, but whatever I'm explaining applies to both, the way you structure your answer. Okay, I've already said that for 2, you're not going to be able to calculate, but you are going to be able to check what the company says. Still, this is in your notes, not the financial statements. You are going to be able to check what the company says about net realizable value, what the company says about cost. This is basically how inventories are measured. They are measured either at cost, the lower of cost, or net realizable value. So this will be explained in the financial statements under note 2, IS2, that's inventories. Then if you look at 3, it's saying describe the revenue model of the company, apply the 5-step model from IFRS 15 to a major revenue stream, and explain when revenue is recognized. This is another simple question. Even if you look at your study guide or your prescribed text, the 5-step model is actually explained. So you take those steps as they are, you apply it. Basically, what you need to do here, this applies only to revenue. You look at the company that you selected. What does it deal with? What does it sell? That is the main revenue stream. What does it sell? Let's say you look at ShopRite, it sells groceries. So the main revenue stream will be for what? Income from sales of revenues. So that's what you're going to take from the financial statement. And then you explain step by step. Step 1, what does it say? You explain what it says. Then you link it to the information that you have presented from the financial statement. Step 2, what does it say? You link step 3 all the way to what? To step 5. Because when these financial statements were compiled, they used the 5-step approach. This is IFRS 15 that was applied to recognize revenue. Then number 4, discuss whether the company's treatment of inventory revenue meets the presentation and disclosure requirements. Provide extras or references in your discussion. This is generally your opinion based on the financial statements that you reviewed. You first discuss in terms of inventory. Ensure that the points that you raise are worth 3 marks, because question 6 is, question 4 is worth 6 marks. So your discussion for revenue will be 3 marks. Your discussion for inventory will also be 3 marks. Ensure that you raise enough points. I'm trying to move quickly so that I cover everything because time. All right, then task 3. This is the last task. It is also 30 marks. Group accounting and goodwill. Please go through the information. All right, question 2, it deals with goodwill. That's group accounting. Let's look at task 1. It's 6 marks. It says define and explain the concept of group, subsidiary, and control. So your explanation for group is 2 marks. Explanation of subsidiary is 2 marks. Your explanation of control is also 2 marks. Ensure that in your explanation you cover all these 3 concepts: group, subsidiary, and control, because if you leave one, you are going to unnecessarily lose 2 marks. So this is something that you can get from your textbook, you can get online, you can get from your study guides. Please, as I said, do not cut and paste. Paraphrase. That's question 1. 2, it says using data from your selected company. I'll still advise you that you use one company from task 1 all the way to task 3. Because by the time you go to task 3, you will be having a full understanding of those financial statements that you have been analyzing from task 1, task 2, task 3, but it's not compulsory. It's up to you which company you'll be using. So using data from your selected company's financial, explain how goodwill was calculated on the acquisition of a subsidiary, include purchase consideration. In other words, when you look at this question, you can first research how goodwill is calculated. That's the first part. And then you got your financial statements. You look at the calculation, at how your company applies goodwill. It will be explained in your financial statements. You just take it as it is, you paraphrase, you present it as your answer. By the purchase consideration, it's how much was paid to purchase the particular subsidiary. Then fair value of net assets. This will also be presented to you in the financial statements. You look for the fair value, you take it as it is. And then non-controlling interests. All this is presented to you basically in the statement, mostly of financial position, as well as in your notes to the financial statements. Then if you explain all these, you will be able to score 10 marks. Then number 3, assess whether the company performs goodwill impairment testing in accordance with relevant accounting standards. Summarize the method, assumptions, and outcomes disclosed. For question 3, I will advise that sometimes it can be challenging for you to be able to determine this using the financial statements that have been presented online. So what you can do, you can just let me just go through the question saying assess whether the company performs goodwill impairment in accordance with the relevant standard. All companies are required to perform goodwill impairment using what? Relevant accounting standards, because all financial statements are actually drawn here in South Africa, actually drawn based on specific financial accounting standards. So you can just research online how an impairment of goodwill goodwill impairment is tested. You go online, you check how goodwill impairment is tested. You can even check from your prescribed books. If you look at a prescribed book, textbook, there is an explanation that looks at how goodwill impairment is tested. Now, do not take that information as it is. Paraphrase, you present it as your answer based on the relevant accounting standards. So whatever you're explaining should be based on the accounting standards. I'm sure you can see that it's saying summarize the method, assumptions and outcomes disclosed. All this you can get it from your research. Then lastly, comment on the usefulness of consolidated financial statements and reflecting the financial position and performance of the group. This is another question that you can research. Please don't get stuck, because all these questions you can research. But the key is that after researching, do not just take the answers as they are. Try to link them to your financial statements. If you have presented financial statements for Shoprite, please, whatever explanation you give, just link it to the financial statements that you submitted, because your marker or the marker of your script will check whatever you present will be compared to what was submitted. So that was the last task, task 3. All tasks, they add up to 90. Why? Because there is a last section, which is WIL reflection. Most of you ignore WIL reflection, but it is a requirement. So it's allocated 10 marks. Let me just go down. All right. This is how your WIL will be assessed. This is how your WIL is expected to cover. If you miss any, you are going to lose a lot of marks. So ensure that your WIL covers all these aspects that are presented here. For example, is the question say, is there a link between content and practical industry scenarios? You explain. You are writing a report. So a reflection essay, it is an essay, it is a report. 500 to 600 words reflecting on your WIL project. So you're reporting on your experience as you were conducting your research, as you were writing your answers. Is there a link between theory and industry from the task that you're completing? Did the WIL enhance your practical skills? You answer, you explain. Don't just say yes, please provide detail. In what ways did you succeed or do well? Explain. In what ways were you challenged? Explain the challenging parts and why were they challenging. What can you improve on in future? This is basically asking you, you are reflecting. So what can you improve on in future? You also answer based on the answers that were presented. Okay, so the WIL reflection essay is worth 10 marks. All in total, task 1, 2, 3, and reflection essay will give you 100 marks. All right. Should you have any questions, you can ask, but that's all from my side. I hope the guidance that I presented will be able to assist you as you structure your answers, as you finalize your answers. Cheers to everyone. Goodbye.